The Barr DOJ's announcement today that they plan to release a redacted Mueller report this Thursday on eve of Good Friday and Passover is raising questions, as I've just mentioned, about whether they're trying to potentially bury this, a Friday news dump or a holiday news dump. Now, when you think about the last Justice Department under Barr, he was Attorney General under George H.W. Bush, and the president issued 6 pardons in the Iran-Contra case when? On Christmas Eve.
Mr. Bush granted a Christmas Eve pardon to former defense chief Caspar Weinberger and 5 other Reagan administration officials.
Bush called it an act of healing. The Iran-Contra prosecutor called it the completion of a cover-up.
But as the New York Times reported at the time, it was accused as a cover-up, and the president was consulting on those very Christmas Eve pardons with Attorney General Bill Barr. I want to bring in former U.S. Solicitor General and MSNBC analyst Neal Katyal. Thanks for joining me tonight, Neal.
Thank you.
I want to get to several things, but starting with this big news, your view of both the announcement of Thursday as a time to get the redacted report, whether that raises any questions, and how you view that more broadly with Mr. Barr's approach thus far.
Yeah, I mean, color me skeptical. I think that there's reasons to doubt Barr's up and upness on this. So it's not just that he wrote a 19-page memo last summer saying that Trump basically couldn't obstruct justice on a really flimsy legal theory. It's not just that he cleared the president of obstruction of justice in 48 hours when it took Mueller 2 years and he didn't make that conclusion and said it does not exonerate. It's also things like his testimony last week where Barr said that there may have been, quote, unlawful spying going on, and this weekend that led the Trump campaign to even do ads around that and saying, oh, this, effectively deep state is engaged in unlawful spying. There's the perception, and hopefully not the reality, that the Attorney General is really Trump's Attorney General, not the Attorney General of the American people.
Right, and as you say, it's a matter of looking at that holistically, and the testimony he gave, we didn't give it even a lot of time on the show because the underlying claims were so weak as to not in themselves be factually newsworthy, although one can decide whether or not criticizing the sort of congressional hearing by tweet storm approach is something worth criticizing. And as you say, I think that goes into the analysis. I also want to ask you about the Trump side defense, which would seem to be aided by Mueller not indicting on a conspiracy. And so for your analysis, a fellow former prosecutor like yourself, a former DOJ official, Renato Mariotti, puts it like this. What if Trump truly believed that the investigation was meritless and a waste of government resources? Then, as they greet the Mueller report this week, could they argue there's the evidence that Trump was aware of facts central to the collusion investigation, and thus he had good reason not to believe a crime had been committed? The idea that the one thing Mueller and Trump may agree on is no chargeable election conspiracy, and that saves otherwise potentially unlawful acts by the president. Your response to that argument?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is it's just bizarre to think that we even are talking about a legal defense. Remember, this is the president who said the Mueller report totally exonerates him, and now he's preparing a 50-page rebuttal. I guess it's down from 140 pages, but that isn't the way an innocent person, I think, would behave, particularly in light of a report that supposedly clears him. Now, Mr. Marotti's argument is effectively that the Trump lawyers in the Trump White House basically they discount what the president says, and he says one thing and says things that are outrageous but doesn't act on them. But here the case for obstruction of justice has never been about the president's intentions. It's been about his actions. It's been about firing Jim Comey, and when asked about it on NBC News, he said the reason why was because of the Russia thing. So I don't think actually Renato's explanation is likely to carry the day. We'll see what the report says. Obviously, we don't know what it says. Trump evidently does, because Barr, I think it was revealed over the weekend, did give him something of a heads up about the report, but we don't know yet.
Legally, we have some breaking news. Let me turn to that. breaking news here at MSNBC. The New York Times reporting that House Democrats have now subpoenaed Deutsche Bank and other lenders for Russia-related materials on Donald Trump's finances. Reading from the Times story, congressional investigators issuing new subpoenas to Deutsche Bank and, quote, numerous other banks seeking information about Trump's finances and, quote, the lenders' business dealings with Russians. This is sourced to multiple people dealing with the congressional probe. An interesting story, one we've been following, many people have been following for years. Neal Katyal, who served in the Justice Department, did not know this story was breaking any more than the rest of us, but I do believe with what little I've told you, you can at least speak broadly to what it means when Congress takes the step of subpoenaing and what one might be looking for on these records, which, of course, have also been an issue in the Mueller probe that you've been analyzing for us for some time.
Yeah, I think they're looking for two things. One is evidence of any potential crimes that were committed, not just by Trump, but by the organization, by people around him. And second, broader than that, governance issues and whether a good judgment was exercised. And ordinarily, there'd be some protection, and not all these documents would need to be turned over. But it was the House Republicans, when they were in charge just a few months ago, that blew past every tradition and restriction, going so far as to seek subpoenas for classified information about FISA, about search warrants, very highly classified information. So it's going to be very, very hard now for them to turn around and be like, oh, we can't share these documents or see these documents.
And that's the other piece, Neal. I mean, we talk a lot about tradition, and there are many good reasons that lawyers, who, of course, are also employed by these House investigators, will give time and try to use what is sometimes called less restrictive means to pursue information before they go to subpoenas. What do you make of, here we are in April, so roughly, just 3-4 months into this new Congress, with a president who so blatantly said he will defy these requests, he will fight them at every turn, he won't cooperate? How does that fit into what we're seeing that looks like a much higher and earlier subpoena rate of sort of going to the mat this early in this young Congress's tenure?
Well, I've been quite impressed with Chairman Nadler, because he was under pressure to subpoena starting on, January 5th or whatever day he was sworn in some months ago. And I think he's gone carefully and deliberately and tried to get information through other means. So the fact that he's going and doing this suggests to me he thinks, well, not that there's probable cause that a crime has been committed, but that there's some probable cause to believe there's a need for the investigation for these materials, and he hasn't been able to get them through any other mechanism.
And let me do one more question on this, and then I do want to get you on some of the Supreme Court stuff that I also want to ask you about tonight. Reading from the Times article, it explains they're jointly investigating Deutsche Bank's relationship with Trump, and it mentions that he's, quote, that's the only mainstream bank consistently willing to do business with Trump. Given his bankruptcies, the bank lent him well over $2 billion. Trump had more than $300 million in outstanding loans from Deutsche Bank from the time he took office. And the spokesman for the bank says we're going to provide appropriate information to authorize investigations. A kind of a boilerplate statement, Neal, and yet one that is probably not great news to Trump. We know this week he's also been urging his independent accounting companies to try to hold back his tax returns, which are also being pursued through multiple doors from congressional Democrats. And so I wonder here what you think is important from the oversight perspective that might be different from Mueller. For example, if Mueller looks at all those financial records and doesn't see basically crimes in the United States, my understanding is, other than what else he tells people, he sort of moves on. Whereas with congressional investigators, if they found that there was, for example, a lawful private auction of the sitting president's debt, say there was debt that he was holding, that Deutsche Bank or others were holding, and they sold it, say to a country's sovereign bank or some other entity, that might be very much in Congress's interest to deal with as oversight, even if it's not technically, potentially, a U.S. crime.
Right. So the special counsel regulations gave Mueller only a very limited mandate to look at Russia and things like obstruction of justice of the Russia investigation. And so, Ari, you're absolutely right. To the extent that other crimes unrelated to that, we obviously don't know whether any have been committed or not, but that's why the investigation is seeking these documents to try and figure that out. But whatever we learn on Thursday from Barr and Mueller, no matter how redacted it is or how open it will be, it's only about that one lane, Russia and obstruction, nothing larger than that.
Well, it's fascinating to get your views of Barr and this breaking news. I'm not going to press you for Passover or Good Friday legal analogies, partly because we don't have time. I want to get you on something I know you're preparing for, which is one of the reasons you're such an interesting legal analyst for us. Your extensive experience arguing before the Supreme Court, including on behalf of the Obama administration. I know you're headed back there to do that again. And we have a little cameo for you from, we can't show you inside the courtroom because they don't allow cameras. Everybody knows that. But you did simulate it once in a House of Cards cameo. Let's take a look at that.
If you do not say that this is wrong, that this is unconstitutional, there is nothing to prevent this sort of senseless tragedy from happening again. We ask for nothing more than reform and oversight. Your ruling is a crucial first step. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Katyal.
For most of us who don't go inside those hallowed halls, we're curious, how much does that look like your experience? And as part of our opening arguments series here that we're happy to have you for, walk us through this case and what you're doing, what it's like to prep for what you're about to do, which is going back before the High Court.
Well, Ari, why is this night different than any other night? Because we're talking about the Supreme Court, which is not something that we talk about on nightly news, but it is our third branch of government. It's crucial to the rule of law. And yeah, in 36 hours, I'll be arguing my 39th case before there. And I wish, actually, that all Americans could see the Supreme Court in action and not be reduced to a Netflix fictional episode, because it really is the one branch of our government that works. So an oral argument at the Supreme Court is now only a half hour per side. It used to be 9 days back at the founding, the days when Daniel Webster argued. It went on and on. But now it's a half hour compressed. Like my Indian wedding was, from 3 days, the traditional Hindu wedding, it was compressed to 28 minutes. Same thing for Supreme Court arguments today. Very, very compressed. I get about 70 questions, 70, in any oral argument. And so what I'm doing now is really just preparing for, with moot courts, trying to prepare for rapid fire questions. And, there's a lot of public talk about the justices, but this is really the one branch of government that works. They bring their A game every day, and it's pretty disconcerting sometimes for an advocate to face all those questions.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you put it that way in terms of how it works. I mean, it's the arm of government that doesn't really typically do press releases or tweets or press conferences. As you say, it's through those oral arguments that we can hear the audio, we can read the transcript, and through the force of law of the opinions. And you've been a front row participant in that. You said, why is this night different? As we all know, there are 4 types of children that we answer that question to, with different types of answers. I think it's fair to say the answer for you would be the intelligent son or daughter, the smart child out of the 4. But it's an open Passover question. If viewers have input, you can tweet us at The Beat with Ari of which child you think Neal Katyal would be. And sir,
oh no.
Well, there's only 4. None of them are terrible. My vote is the smart one. Thank you, Neal, for being here. And by the way, if you like what we're doing with Neal, go to msnbc.com/opening arguments, and you can see all of these segments and share them. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.